The stagecoach rumbled into Winnemucca, Nevada on a dusty September afternoon in 1878, carrying a woman whose expensive traveling dress was already ruined by the long journey from Boston. And when the driver hauled down her single steamer trunk from the roof, it hit the ground with a thud that made every man within earshot wonder what in blazes she was carrying that weighed more than a mining claim. Sophia Whitmore stepped down onto the wooden platform, her copper-colored hair escaping its pins after 3 weeks of travel, and surveyed the rough frontier town with eyes that had read about the West in 100 volumes, but had never seen it with such stark clarity. The air smelled of sage and horses and possibility. Behind her, the driver was struggling with her trunk, cursing under his breath. "What you got in here, lady?" "Rocks." "Books," she said simply, and the word seemed to hang in the dry air like something foreign and strange. The driver laughed, a short bark of disbelief. "Books? You brought books to Winnemucca?" Sophia turned to face him, her chin lifting with quiet dignity. "I brought myself to Winnemucca. The books simply came with me." She had answered an advertisement for a schoolteacher, one of those desperate notices that appeared in Eastern newspapers when frontier towns finally grew civilized enough to want their children educated. The pay was modest, the conditions uncertain, but Sophia had her own reasons for leaving Boston. A broken engagement, a father who drank away her dowry, a mother buried in Mount Auburn Cemetery. Books had been her escape, her education, her companions through 23 years of disappointment. Now they would be her livelihood. The boarding house was easy to find because Winnemucca only had 2 streets that could properly be called streets, and the rest were rutted tracks between buildings. Mrs. Patterson, the proprietress, was a weathered woman with kind eyes who took one look at Sophia and shook her head. "You are not what this town expects in a schoolteacher," she said, but there was no unkindness in it. What did they expect? Someone older, someone harder, someone who looks like they could survive a Nevada winter without breaking. Sophia smiled faintly. "I have survived worse than winter." Mrs. Patterson showed her to a small room on the 2nd floor, barely large enough for a narrow bed and a washstand. "Where would you like your trunk?" "Here is fine, thank you." "What is in it?" Felt like I was hauling lead. "Books." Mrs. Patterson blinked. "Just books, just books." The older woman studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Well, I suppose you will need something to do in the evenings." "Not much entertainment in Winnemucca, unless you count the saloons, and I do not imagine you will be frequenting those." After Mrs. Patterson left, Sophia opened her trunk and looked down at the carefully packed volumes that represented everything she valued in the world. Shakespeare and Whitman, Dickens and Austen, volumes of poetry and philosophy and natural history. She had sold her mother's jewelry to pay for passage west, but these she could not sell. These were not possessions. They were pieces of her soul. She was supposed to report to the small schoolhouse in the morning, but for now, she was simply tired. Tired from the journey, tired from the endless jolting of the stagecoach, tired from holding herself together through every mile that separated her from the life she had known. She changed into her nightdress and lay down on the narrow bed, listening to the sounds of Winnemucca settling into evening. Horses, distant laughter, a piano playing somewhere down the street. She did not hear the footsteps in the hallway until they stopped outside her door. A knock, soft and uncertain. Sophia sat up, pulling her shawl around her shoulders. "Yes, Mrs. Patterson sent me, madam, about your trunk." The voice was male, low and careful. Sophia hesitated, then moved to open the door just wide enough to see who stood in the dim hallway. He was tall, built like someone who worked with his hands for a living, wearing dusty clothes and a hat he had already removed in deference to her presence. His face was shadowed, but she could see dark eyes that looked uncertain, almost shy. "I apologize for the intrusion, madam. I am Owen Ashford. I do carpentry work here in town, and Mrs. Patterson mentioned you might be needing some furniture built. She said your trunk was too heavy to be clothing." Sophia found herself studying him with more attention than was probably proper. He had a strong face, clean-shaven when many men in town wore beards, and there was something gentle in the way he held himself, as if he was trying to take up less space than his frame naturally required. "I have books," she said. "The trunk is full of books, and I have nowhere to put them." Owen's expression shifted, something like surprise crossing his features. "Books? You brought books all the way from the East. They are necessary. I am the new schoolteacher." "Right, yes, Mrs. Patterson mentioned." He seemed to gather himself. "I could build you some shelves for the books, if you would like." Sophia glanced back at her small room, at the trunk sitting like an island in the limited floor space. "I am not certain I can afford much carpentry work, Mr. Ashford. The school board has not yet paid me." "I was not asking for payment tonight, madam. Just wanted to know if you would be interested. I could come by in the morning, take some measurements, let you know what it might cost. If the price does not suit, no harm done." There was something honest in his face, something that made Sophia want to trust him despite knowing nothing about him except his name. "That would be acceptable, Mr. Ashford. Thank you." He nodded, started to turn away, then paused. "What kind of books? Does it matter?" "Just curious, I suppose. Do not see many books in Winnemucca except for the Bible and dime novels." Sophia found herself almost smiling. "All kinds. Literature, poetry, history, natural philosophy, everything I could carry." Owen's expression did something complicated, like he wanted to say more but was not sure if he should. Finally, he just nodded again. "Well, that sounds fine. I will see you in the morning, Miss Whitmore, Sophia Whitmore, Miss Whitmore." He put his hat back on, tipped it slightly. "Welcome to Winnemucca." After he left, Sophia closed the door and leaned against it, feeling something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Not quite hope, not quite anticipation, just a small warmth that had not been there before. She slept poorly, unused to the sounds of the frontier, and woke before dawn to find pale light seeping through the thin curtains. She dressed carefully in one of her simpler dresses, pinned her hair up properly, and went downstairs to find Mrs. Patterson already in the kitchen. "There is coffee," the older woman said, "and biscuits if you are hungry. You met Owen last night, briefly. Good man. Lost his wife 2 years back to fever, does honest work, does not drink more than is reasonable, goes to church when the circuit preacher comes through. If he says he will build you something, he will build it right." Sophia absorbed this information quietly, wrapping her hands around a cup of coffee that tasted nothing like the refined brew her mother used to make, but had a rough comfort to it anyway. "He mentioned coming by this morning." "He will. Owen is reliable as sunrise." Mrs. Patterson studied her with sharp eyes. "You look like you did not sleep. New place, new sounds. You will adjust. Everyone does eventually, or they go back east." "I will not be going back east." Something in her tone made Mrs. Patterson nod with approval. "Good. This town needs a teacher who will stay. The last one left after 6 months, said she could not bear the isolation." Sophia thought about the isolation of her father's house, the silence of rooms filled with disappointment and empty bottles. "I have known worse isolation than geography." She was finishing her coffee when she heard boots on the front porch, followed by a polite knock. Mrs. Patterson went to answer it, and Sophia heard Owen's voice, quiet and respectful. "Morning, Mrs. Patterson. Is Miss Whitmore available?" "Come in, Owen. She is in the kitchen." He appeared in the doorway, hat in hand again, and Sophia saw him properly for the first time in daylight. He was perhaps 27 or 28, with dark hair that curled slightly at the ends and warm brown eyes that held intelligence and something like sadness. He wore work clothes, but they were clean, and there was a carpenter's rule visible in his shirt pocket. "Good morning, Miss Whitmore. I hope I am not too early." "Not at all, Mr. Ashford. Would you like coffee?" "Already had some, thank you." He shifted his weight slightly. "If you are ready, I could take a look at your room, see what might be done about shelving." Sophia led him upstairs, acutely aware of how improper this might seem in Boston, but understanding that frontier propriety operated under different rules. She opened her door and stepped aside to let him see the space. Owen moved into the room with careful attention, his eyes assessing the walls, the dimensions, the light from the window. He pulled out the carpenter's rule and began taking measurements, occasionally making notes on a scrap of paper he produced from his pocket. "How many books?" he asked. Sophia opened the trunk so he could see. Owen stepped closer and looked down at the neat rows of volumes, his expression shifting into something like wonder. "That is a lot of books. 87, to be precise." He crouched down, running his hand carefully along the spines without actually touching them, as if he was afraid to damage something precious. Sophia saw him reading the titles silently, his lips moving slightly. "You have read all of these, most of them multiple times." Owen looked up at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Not desire, not exactly, more like recognition, like he saw something in her that he understood. "I will build you shelves that can hold them properly," he said quietly. "Strong enough to last, nice enough to do them justice. I can have them ready by morning if I work through the night." "Mr. Ashford, that is not necessary. I can wait a few days." "No," he said, standing up. "No, you should not have to keep them locked in a trunk. Books should not be hidden away like that." There was something fervent in his voice, something that made Sophia study him more closely. "You read, Mr. Ashford," color touched his cheeks. "Some, when I can. My wife used to read to me in the evenings before she passed. I am not as educated as you, but I appreciate books. Education and appreciation are not the same thing. One can exist without the other." Owen met her eyes, and a slow smile crossed his face, transforming it. "That is the truth of it, is it not? I have known plenty of educated fools in my time." Sophia found herself smiling back. "As have I." He took a few more measurements, made a few more notes, then straightened. "I have what I need. I will get started today, bring everything by tonight to assemble. You will be here in the morning. I report to the schoolhouse at 8, but I should be back by late afternoon. I will have it done before you wake. You have my word." After he left, Sophia sat on her bed and looked at her open trunk of books, feeling something shift inside her like a door opening onto unexpected light. She had come to Winnemucca expecting nothing but survival, a place to rebuild a small and quiet life. She had not expected kindness. She had not expected someone who looked at her books with reverence instead of confusion. The schoolhouse was a simple building at the edge of town, one room with a wood stove and benches that had been worn smooth by young bodies. Sophia spent the morning meeting the members of the school board, all men who looked at her with varying degrees of skepticism. She was too young, too refined, too Eastern. But they needed a teacher, and she had credentials from a respectable academy, so they gave her the position with warnings about the roughness of frontier children and the importance of discipline. The children themselves would not arrive until the following Monday, which gave Sophia several days to prepare lessons and organize the limited supplies. She threw herself into the work, grateful for the distraction, trying not to think about Owen Ashford or the way he had looked at her books. She returned to the boarding house as the sun was setting, tired and dusty and oddly content. Mrs. Patterson met her at the door with an expression of mixed amusement and concern. "Owen has been here all evening," she said, "working in your room. I took him some dinner, but I do not think he ate much of it. The man is possessed." Sophia felt her heart beat faster. "Is he still there? Go see for yourself." She climbed the stairs with something like trepidation, not knowing what to expect. Her door was ajar, lamplight spilling into the hallway. She pushed it open slowly. Owen was on his knees in the corner of the room, fitting together what looked like the final piece of a beautiful shelving unit that stretched from floor to ceiling along the entire wall. Wood shavings littered the floor around him, and his shirt was damp with sweat despite the cool evening air. He had brought a lantern that cast warm light across his work, and Sophia could see the care he had put into every joint, every board. "Mr. Ashford." He looked up, startled, then got to his feet quickly, brushing sawdust from his knees. "Miss Whitmore, I am sorry I did not hear you come in. I am almost finished." Sophia stepped into the room and stared at the shelves. They were simple but elegant, made from smooth pine that had been sanded until it glowed in the lamplight. The supports were strong and evenly spaced, perfect for holding the weight of books. He had even built a small section at the bottom with a door, like a cabinet. "Mr. Ashford, this is beautiful. It should hold all your books with room to spare. The cabinet at the bottom is for anything you want to keep out of sight, papers, personal items, whatever you like." He was watching her face anxiously. "Does it suit?" "It is more than suitable. It is perfect." She turned to look at him. "You must be exhausted. You have been working all day." "I wanted to get it done." He rubbed the back of his neck, looking almost embarrassed. "I know it seems excessive, but I kept thinking about those books locked in that trunk, and it just seemed wrong somehow. Like keeping birds in a cage when they should be flying." The poetry of his words struck her silent for a moment. Finally, she said softly, "That is exactly what it feels like sometimes, like the books are living things that need space to breathe." Owen's expression softened. "Then I am glad I could give them that space." They stood looking at each other across the small room, something passing between them that was too new and fragile to have a name. Finally, Owen cleared his throat and began gathering his tools. "I should clean up this mess and let you rest. We can settle on payment later, after you have had time to consider what is fair. Mr. Ashford, I told you I cannot afford much. And I told you I was not worried about payment tonight." He paused, his hand stilling on his toolbox. "The truth is, Miss Whitmore, I would have built these shelves for nothing. Just for the privilege of seeing someone care about books the way you obviously do. But I know that would be improper, so we will work something out that feels right to both of us. Fair." Sophia felt heat rising in her cheeks. "Fair." He swept up the wood shavings and carried his tools to the door, then paused to look back at the shelves one more time. "Will you put the books on yourself, or would you like help in the morning? I can manage, but thank you." "All right then." "Good night, Miss Whitmore." "Good night, Mr. Ashford, and thank you, truly." After he left, Sophia stood alone in her room, staring at the empty shelves that seemed to glow with promise. She knelt beside her trunk and carefully lifted out the first book, a worn copy of Jane Eyre that had been her mother's. She placed it on the shelf with reverence, then reached for the next one, and the next. It took her nearly 2 hours to arrange all 87 volumes to her satisfaction, organizing them first by subject, and then by author, creating a small library that transformed her sparse room into something that felt like home. When she was finished, she stood back and felt tears prickling her eyes. She had not cried when her engagement ended. She had not cried when her father lost the house. She had not even cried when her mother died, too numb with shock and grief to access that kind of release. But now, looking at her books safe and displayed and honored, she felt something break open inside her chest. The tears came silently, rolling down her cheeks as she touched the spine of each beloved volume. These were her anchors, her companions, her proof that beauty and meaning existed even in a harsh world. And Owen Ashford, a carpenter she had met less than 24 hours ago, had understood that without her having to explain it. She finally climbed into bed near midnight, exhausted and emotionally wrung out, and fell asleep looking at the shadows of her books on the wall. Morning came too soon, pale light touching her face and pulling her out of dreams she could not quite remember. She sat up slowly, disoriented for a moment, and then remembered where she was. Winnemucca, Nevada, the schoolhouse. The books. She turned her head and looked at the shelves, and her breath caught. Owen had come back. At some point during the night, he had returned and done something she had not noticed in the darkness. He had carved her name into a small wooden plaque and mounted it above the shelves. Not just S. Whitmore or Miss Whitmore. He had carved the full inscription, Sophia Whitmore's library. She got out of bed and crossed to the shelves, running her fingers over the carved letters. The work was delicate and precise, the kind of detail that required both skill and patience. He must have worked on it for hours after leaving her room, then crept back in the early morning to install it while she slept. There was a small piece of paper tucked into one of the books at eye level. Sophia pulled it out and unfolded it. The handwriting was neat but unpracticed, the letters formed with care. Miss Whitmore, I hope you do not mind the addition. It seemed to me that a library should have a proper name, and yours deserves to be honored. As for payment, I would consider it settled if you would allow me to borrow a book from time to time. I promise to care for them as you would yourself. Owen Ashford. Sophia pressed the note to her chest, feeling her heart beat against it. She had known this man for less than 2 days, and already he had shown her more kindness than most people she had known for years. More than that, he had seen her, not the failed engagement or the disappointing daughter or the too-educated spinster. He had seen the part of her that mattered most and had honored it. She dressed quickly and went downstairs to find Mrs. Patterson in the kitchen again. Did Owen come back last night? Sophia asked without preamble. Early this morning, before dawn. I heard him on the stairs but did not want to interfere. Did he finish the shelves? He did more than finish them. Sophia showed her the note. He wants to borrow books as payment. Mrs. Patterson read the note and smiled, a soft expression that made her weathered face look younger. That sounds like Owen. He has always valued things that matter more than things that cost. You think he means it, about the books? Owen does not say things he does not mean. If he asks to borrow books, it is because he wants to read them, not because he is being polite. Mrs. Patterson handed the note back. You could do worse than to have Owen Ashford as a friend in this town, Miss Whitmore. He is one of the good ones. Sophia spent the rest of the week preparing for her first day of teaching, but her thoughts kept returning to Owen and his quiet kindness. She saw him occasionally around town, always from a distance. He would tip his hat to her, and she would nod back, and neither of them seemed ready to close the distance beyond that. On Sunday, she attended services at the small church on the edge of town, where a circuit preacher delivered a sermon about charity and grace. Owen was there, sitting near the back in clean clothes with his hair neatly combed. Their eyes met across the room, and Sophia felt that same flutter of recognition, of something unspoken but understood. After the service, he approached her carefully, hat in hand as always. Miss Whitmore, how are you settling in? Very well, thank you. The shelves are perfect. I am glad. He hesitated. About my note, I did not mean to be presumptuous. If you would rather I pay in cash, I can arrange that. No, Sophia said quickly. No, I think your suggestion is more than fair. You are welcome to borrow any book you would like. Relief washed over his face. Thank you. I promise to take care of them. I know you will." She paused, gathering courage. "Would you like to choose one now? I am heading back to the boarding house." Something like joy flashed in his eyes. "I would like that very much." They walked together through the quiet Sunday streets, not touching but close enough that Sophia could smell sawdust and clean soap on his clothes. Mrs. Patterson gave them a knowing look as they passed through the front hall, but she said nothing. In her room, Owen stood before the shelves like a child in front of a candy shop, his eyes roaming over the titles with barely contained excitement. "I do not know where to start," he admitted. "What would you recommend? What kind of stories do you like? I am not certain I know." Sarah, my wife, she used to read whatever she could get her hands on. Newspapers, catalogs, anything with words. We only had 3 books of our own. His voice went quiet. I kept meaning to buy her more, but there was always something else that needed doing, and then she was gone. Sophia felt her throat tighten. "I am sorry for your loss. It has been 2 years. Some days it feels like forever, and some days it feels like yesterday." He shook his head as if to clear it. "But I did not come here to burden you with sad stories. Grief is not a burden, Mr. Ashford. It is proof that love existed." He looked at her with such naked appreciation that Sophia had to glance away, her cheeks warming. "Call me Owen," he said softly. "If you are going to let me borrow your books, we should be on familiar terms. Only if you call me Sophia. Sophia." He said her name carefully, like he was tasting it. "It suits you." She pulled a book from the shelf, one of her favorites. "Try this one. Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. It is about a boy who grows up poor but dreams of becoming a gentleman. It is full of adventure and mystery and hope." Owen took the book from her hands with reverence, running his fingers over the cover. "I will take good care of it. I know." He left soon after, clutching the book like it was treasure, and Sophia stood at her window watching him walk down the street until he disappeared from view. The schoolhouse filled with children on Monday morning, 23 of them ranging from age 6 to 15, all watching Sophia with wary curiosity. She met their stares calmly and began with introductions, learning their names and their circumstances. Most were children of ranchers or miners. A few were the offspring of shopkeepers or craftsmen. They were rough around the edges, suspicious of this Eastern lady with her refined accent and clean hands. But Sophia had not survived her father's alcoholic rages by being fragile. She taught them reading and arithmetic, history and geography, using every trick she had learned from her own education. She was firm but fair, demanding their attention but giving them respect in return. By the end of the first week, she had won over most of them, and the few who remained skeptical, at least grudgingly, did their work. Owen came by the boarding house on Wednesday evening with Great Expectations in hand and an expression of wonder on his face. "I finished it," he said, standing in the doorway of her room like he was afraid to intrude. "I could not put it down. I was up until nearly midnight last night reading by lamplight." Sophia felt a rush of pleasure. "Did you like it?" "Like it?" "Sophia, I felt like I was there, living Pip's life alongside him. The way Dickens writes, the way he makes you care about people even when they are flawed, it is remarkable." They talked about the book for nearly an hour, dissecting plot and character, arguing gently about Pip's choices and Estella's coldness. Owen had insights that surprised Sophia, observations that showed he understood the deeper themes even without formal education. When he finally left with a new book, Sophia realized she had smiled more in that hour than she had in the entire previous month. It became their pattern. Every few days, Owen would return a book and choose a new one, and they would spend time discussing what he had read. Sometimes they talked in her room, sometimes on the porch of the boarding house, sometimes while walking through town as evening fell. Mrs. Patterson watched these interactions with approval, and soon half of Winnemucca knew that the schoolteacher and the carpenter were keeping company. "People are talking," Sophia said one evening as they walked along the creek that ran behind the town. Owen glanced at her. "Does that bother you?" "I am not sure. In Boston, it would be scandalous. Here, I cannot tell if the rules are different or if I am simply caring less about propriety." "Both, probably." He picked up a smooth stone and skipped it across the water. "For what it is worth, what they are saying is mostly positive. They think it is good that I am moving on, that I am not dwelling in the past anymore." "Are you moving on?" Owen was quiet for a long moment. "I loved Sarah. She was my whole world for 5 years, and when she died, I thought I would never feel whole again. For a long time, I just went through the motions of living without really feeling alive." He turned to look at Sophia. "But then you arrived with your trunk full of books, and something woke up inside me. Not forget Sarah, never that. But remembering that there is still beauty in the world, still things worth caring about." Sophia felt her eyes burning. "I understand that feeling. After my mother died and my engagement ended, I felt like I was just existing, not living. Coming here was supposed to be a practical decision, a way to support myself. I did not expect to find anything more than survival." "And have you found something more?" She looked at him, at his honest face and kind eyes, and felt her heart make a decision her mind had been avoiding. "Yes, I think I have." Owen reached for her hand, tentative and careful. His palm was calloused from years of carpentry, warm and solid against her smaller fingers. They stood there by the creek as the sun set, holding hands like children, and Sophia felt something settle inside her that had been restless for years. The autumn deepened into winter, and Winnemucca prepared for the harsh months ahead. Sophia's schoolhouse had a wood stove, but it struggled to heat the large room, and she spent her days teaching children whose breath fogged in the cold air. Owen showed up one afternoon with extra wood for the stove and insulation for the walls, refusing any payment beyond the books he was already borrowing. "The children should not have to freeze while learning," he said, already at work reinforcing the drafty corners. Sophia watched him work, admiring the efficiency of his movements, the quiet competence he brought to every task. He had become essential to her life in ways she had not anticipated, not just as a friend or a borrower of books, but as someone who made her feel seen and valued and understood. One evening in late November, as the first real snow began to fall, Owen arrived at the boarding house with something tucked under his coat. Sophia met him in the parlor, where Mrs. Patterson had lit a fire against the cold. "I made you something," Owen said, pulling out a wooden box about the size of a large book. "I know it is not much, but I wanted you to have it." Sophia took the box and opened it carefully. Inside was a portable writing desk, complete with compartments for paper and ink, a slanted surface for writing, and small drawers for storing letters and personal items. The wood was polished to a soft glow, and her initials had been carved into the lid with the same care he had shown on the library plaque. "Owen, this is exquisite. I thought you might want something for your personal correspondence, separate from your school work. And it folds up small enough to carry if you need to travel." Sophia ran her fingers over the smooth wood, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "I do not know what to say." "You do not have to say anything." Owen shifted his weight, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Actually, that is not entirely true. There is something I have been wanting to say, but I have been trying to find the right time, and I am starting to think there is no perfect time, so I should just say it now." Sophia looked up at him, her heart suddenly pounding. "What is it?" "I am falling in love with you." The words came out in a rush, like he had been holding them back for too long. "I know it has only been a few months, and I know you came here to start a new life, not to be courted by a widower with sawdust in his hair. But I cannot stop thinking about you, Sophia. About your mind and your kindness, and the way you look at books like they are precious things. About the way you talk to the children at school, and the way you listen when I share my thoughts about whatever I have been reading. I am in love with you, and I needed you to know, even if you do not feel the same way." Sophia set the writing desk down carefully because her hands were shaking. She stepped closer to Owen, close enough to see the gold flecks in his brown eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I feel the same way," she said quietly. "I have been trying not to because it seemed too soon, too impractical. But the truth is, I started falling in love with you the night you built me those shelves, and I have been falling further every day since." Owen's face transformed with joy. He reached for her hands, holding them between his own. "Truly, truly." He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and kissed her with a gentleness that made her chest ache. It was nothing like the few kisses she had shared with her former fiancé, which had been perfunctory and obligatory. This was tender and reverent and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, Sophia was breathless and smiling, and Owen looked like someone had lit a lamp inside him. "I want to court you properly," he said. "With your permission, I know people will talk, but I do not care if you do not. I do not care what people say. Yes, Owen. I would like that very much." Mrs. Patterson, who had undoubtedly been listening from the kitchen, appeared with tea and a knowing smile. "I suppose congratulations are in order," Owen laughed, his arm sliding around Sophia's waist in a gesture that felt natural and right. "I suppose they are." They spent the evening talking about the future, about what courtship meant and what they both wanted. Owen was honest about his past, about the grief that still touched him sometimes when he least expected it. Sophia was equally honest about her own scars, about the father who had disappointed her and the fiancé who had never really known her. "We are both a little broken," Owen said as the evening grew late, "but maybe we can be broken together and call it whole." Sophia kissed him again, soft and sweet. "I think that sounds perfect." The winter was harsh that year, with snow piling high against the buildings and winds that howled through the streets. But Sophia found joy in the season, in the way Owen would meet her after school to walk her home through the snow. In the evenings they spent reading together by the fire, in the slow and steady building of something real between them. On Christmas Eve, Owen invited Sophia to his small house on the edge of town, a place she had not yet visited. It was simple but well kept, one room with a bed and a stove and a table he had built himself. He had decorated modestly with pine branches and candles, and there was a warm fire crackling in the hearth. "I wanted to give you something," he said, leading her to the table where a large package wrapped in brown paper sat waiting. Sophia opened it carefully and found a book she had never seen before, a beautiful illustrated edition of Tennyson's poems that must have cost him a small fortune. "Owen, this is too much." "No," he said firmly. "It is not nearly enough. You have given me so much, Sophia. You brought light back into my life. You reminded me that the world is still full of beautiful things worth caring about. A book seems like a small thing in comparison." Sophia felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she opened the book and saw that he had written an inscription on the first page. "For Sophia, who taught me that the best stories are the ones we live. All my love, Owen. Christmas, 1878. She set the book down and pulled him into her arms, holding him tight. "I love you. I love you too." He pulled back just enough to see her face. "Marry me, Sophia. I know it is fast, and I know we should probably wait longer, but I do not want to wait." I want to spend every day of the rest of my life with you. Say yes." Sophia thought about the life she had left behind in Boston, about the narrow expectations and shallow connections that had defined her existence. Then she thought about Winnemucca and the schoolhouse and the children who were starting to trust her, about Mrs. Patterson and her kindness, about the stark beauty of the Nevada landscape. Most of all, she thought about Owen and the way he saw her, really saw her, and loved what he found. "Yes," she said, and kissed him as the snow fell softly outside, blanketing the world in white. They were married in February, in the same small church where they had first seen each other across the crowded room. Mrs. Patterson stood as witness, and the schoolchildren filled the pews, excited to see their teacher become a bride. Sophia wore a simple dress of deep blue, and Owen wore his best suit, and when they exchanged vows, there was not a dry eye in the building. The celebration afterward was modest but joyful, held in the church hall with food contributed by half the town. People who had been skeptical of the Eastern schoolteacher now toasted her happiness, and people who had worried about Owen's long mourning now celebrated his new beginning. That night, in Owen's house that was now their house, they lay together in the narrow bed and talked about the future. "I want to add on to this place," Owen said, his fingers tracing patterns on her arm. "Build another room or two, maybe a proper study for your books." "The books are ours now, not just mine." "No, they will always be yours in the way that matters, but I like the idea of sharing them with you, building a life around them." Sophia snuggled closer, feeling safe and cherished in a way she had never experienced before. "Do you ever miss Boston?" Owen asked. "Never, not even for a moment. This is home now. You are home." Spring came slowly to Nevada, the snow melting in grudging increments, but when it finally arrived, it brought new life to the harsh landscape. Sophia continued teaching, and Owen continued his carpentry work, and together they built a life that was simple but rich with meaning. In May, Sophia discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror, memories of her mother's difficult pregnancies and eventual death casting shadows over her happiness. Owen sensed her fear and held her through the worried nights, reading to her from her favorite books until she fell asleep. "Whatever happens, we face it together," he promised. "You are not alone in this, Sophia. You will never be alone again." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer, and Sophia taught at the schoolhouse until the heat and her growing belly made it too difficult to continue. Owen hired a temporary teacher to take her place and spent his free time building a cradle from smooth pine, carving it with scenes from fairy tales and nursery rhymes. Their son was born on a crisp October morning in 1879, nearly a year after Sophia had first arrived in Winnemucca. The birth was hard but not dangerous, and when Sophia finally held the tiny, squalling baby in her arms, she felt something in her heart expand beyond what she thought possible. "What should we name him?" Owen asked, perched on the edge of the bed with wonder written across his face. Sophia looked down at the baby's red face, at the dark hair that matched Owen's, at the tiny fingers that gripped her thumb with surprising strength. "Thomas, after my mother's father. He was the only member of my family who encouraged my love of reading. Thomas Ashford." Owen tested the name. "It is perfect." Thomas was a good baby, curious and alert, and Sophia marveled at how quickly she adapted to motherhood. Owen was a devoted father, rising in the night to walk with the baby when he fussed, singing off key lullabies that somehow always worked. By the time Thomas was 6 months old, Sophia was ready to return to teaching part-time. Mrs. Patterson, who had grown fond of the baby, offered to watch him during school hours, and Sophia gratefully accepted. It felt good to be back in the schoolhouse, to see the children's faces light up when she returned. The years passed in a rhythm of work and family, of books and conversations and quiet contentment. Owen expanded their house as promised, building a proper library room with floor-to-ceiling shelves that held not only Sophia's original 87 books, but the many volumes they acquired together. He built a reading nook by the window where Sophia would sit nursing their second child, a daughter they named Margaret, while Thomas played with wooden blocks at her feet. Margaret was born in the spring of 1881, a sunny-natured child who rarely cried and smiled at everyone. Thomas, now 2, was enchanted with his baby sister, constantly wanting to help care for her. The house filled with laughter and noise, with the sounds of children growing and parents loving them. Sophia sometimes thought back to the woman she had been when she arrived in Winnemucca, alone and heartbroken with nothing but a trunk full of books. That woman had been searching for survival, for a way to support herself with dignity. She had found that, and so much more. She had found a home, a purpose, a family, and a love that sustained her through every challenge. Owen, too, had been transformed. The quiet grief that had shadowed him when they met had lifted, replaced by a deep contentment that showed in the way he moved through the world. He still thought of Sarah sometimes, still visited her grave on the anniversary of her death, but the pain had softened into something gentler. He had learned that loving someone new did not diminish what he had felt before, that the heart could expand to hold both memory and hope. In the summer of 1883, when Thomas was 4 and Margaret was 2, Sophia discovered she was pregnant again. This time there was no fear, only excitement. They had proven they could do this, could build a family and nurture it well. The third baby, another boy they named James, arrived the following spring with minimal fuss, slipping into the family as if he had always been there. The library room became a gathering place for the whole family. Owen would read aloud in the evenings while Sophia nursed James. Thomas and Margaret curled up on either side of him, listening with rapt attention. They worked through fairy tales and adventure stories, poetry and history, sharing Sophia's beloved books with the next generation. Thomas showed an early aptitude for reading, sounding out words by age 5 and devouring simple books by 6. Margaret was more interested in pictures and stories she could act out with her dolls. James, as he grew, seemed to combine both traits, loving both the words and the worlds they created. The schoolhouse remained central to Sophia's life. She taught through 3 more pregnancies, taking breaks only when necessary and always returning as soon as she could. The children of Winnemucca learned to read under her patient instruction, and many of them went on to pursue education beyond what the frontier typically offered. Sophia took quiet pride in these successes, in knowing she had helped open doors for young minds. Owen's carpentry business thrived as well. He became known throughout the region for his quality work and fair prices, and there were times when he had to turn down jobs because he was too busy. But he always made time for his family, always put them first even when lucrative opportunities beckoned. By 1890, Thomas was 11, Margaret was 9, James was 6, and they had added twins to the family, a boy and girl named Robert and Ruth, who were 3 years old and full of mischief. The house Owen had built had expanded again and again to accommodate their growing family, until it sprawled across a generous lot with a garden that Sophia tended, and a workshop where Owen created his furniture. One evening, as they sat together in the library room after the children had been put to bed, Owen pulled Sophia into his lap and held her close. "You remember that first night?" he asked. "When I knocked on your door and asked about building shelves, of course." I remember thinking you were either very kind or very strange to offer carpentry services to a woman you had never met. I remember seeing your trunk and being curious about what was inside. When Mrs. Patterson told me it was books, I could not believe someone would travel all that way with nothing but books. He kissed her temple. Best decision I ever made building those shelves. Changed my whole life. Sophia turned in his arms to face him. You changed mine too. I came here expecting to be alone, to build a small and solitary existence. Instead, I found everything I had stopped believing in. Love, family, home. We found each other, Owen corrected gently. Neither of us was really whole on our own, but together we make something beautiful. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sound of the Nevada wind outside and the occasional creak of floorboards as one of the children shifted in sleep upstairs. The library shelves surrounded them, filled now with hundreds of books they had collected together over the years. The original 87 that Sophia had brought from Boston still had pride of place, worn now from multiple readings but still treasured. I have been thinking, Sophia said eventually, about expanding the school. The town has grown so much, and one room is not enough anymore. We need a proper schoolhouse with multiple classrooms. That is an ambitious project, I know, but I think it is necessary. Education should not be limited by space or resources. Owen was quiet for a moment, thinking. I could design it, build it even if the town agrees to fund the materials. It would take time, maybe a year or more, but it could be done. You would do that, for you, for the children of this town, of course. He squeezed her gently. Besides, I like the idea of building something that will last beyond us, something that serves a real purpose. Over the next year, Owen worked with the town council to design and construct a new school building. It was a labor of love, built with the same care he had brought to Sophia's first set of shelves. 2 classrooms, a small office for the teacher, proper windows that let in light, and a wood stove in each room for the harsh winters. He carved an inscription above the door. Winnemucca School ESD, 1891. Knowledge is the foundation of freedom. The town celebrated the new building with a dedication ceremony in the fall. Sophia stood beside Owen, their 5 children arrayed around them, and felt her heart swell with gratitude for the life they had built together. Thomas, now 12, had begun helping his father with carpentry work on weekends, showing the same natural aptitude Owen possessed. Margaret had discovered a love of drawing and spent hours sketching the Nevada landscape. James was following in his mother's footsteps, always with his nose in a book. Robert and Ruth, the twins, were still young and wild, but Sophia could already see distinct personalities emerging. The new century approached, bringing changes to Winnemucca and the West in general. The railroad had come through years before, making travel easier and bringing more people to the region. The rough frontier town Sophia had arrived in was slowly becoming more civilized, with proper stores and services, though it retained the independent spirit that had drawn her in the first place. In 1895, Thomas left home to attend a teacher's college in California, following in his mother's footsteps. It was hard to let him go, but Sophia was proud of the young man he had become, serious and thoughtful with a passion for education. He wrote home regularly, long letters full of observations about his studies and his plans for the future. Margaret discovered a talent for singing and began performing at church services and town gatherings. Her voice was clear and sweet, capable of bringing tears to the eyes of even the most hardened cowboys. James, at 11, was already reading at a level far beyond his years, working his way through his mother's collection with systematic determination. The twins, Robert and Ruth, were 8 now and starting to settle into their own interests. Robert loved working with his hands like his father, while Ruth showed a gift for storytelling, making up elaborate tales to entertain her younger siblings. Yes, there had been two more additions to the family, daughters named Helen and Grace, born in 1893 and 1895 respectively. The house was full and chaotic and perfect. Owen was 44 now, with gray starting to show at his temples and lines around his eyes from years of squinting at woodwork. But he was still strong and vital, still the man who had built her shelves all those years ago, only richer for the life they had lived together. Sophia was 40, her copper hair now threaded with silver, her hands worn from years of teaching and mothering. But she felt more beautiful than she ever had in Boston, more whole and alive. The love between her and Owen had only deepened with time, weathering the challenges of raising 7 children and building a life on the frontier. They still read together in the evenings when time allowed, though these days they often had an audience of children wanting to hear the story too. The library room remained the heart of their home, the place where they gathered as a family to share ideas and dreams and plans. In the spring of 1900, as the new century truly began, Sophia stood in the schoolhouse she and Owen had built together and looked at the faces of the children she taught. Some were the younger siblings of her earliest students, and a few were the children of those first students who had grown up and started families of their own. She had been teaching in Winnemucca for 22 years now, had shaped the education of an entire generation. Thomas had returned to Nevada after completing his degree and taken a teaching position in Carson City. He was courting a young woman he had met at college, and they planned to marry in the summer. Margaret, at 19, had been offered a position singing with a traveling theater company, though she had not yet decided whether to accept. James, 15, was talking about attending university to study literature. The younger children were still finding their paths, but Sophia had no doubt they would each discover their passions in time. That evening, Owen found Sophia in the library room, running her fingers along the spines of the books that had started everything, thinking about the past. He asked, sliding his arms around her waist from behind, thinking about how far we have come. When I arrived here with nothing but these books, I could not have imagined this life. Neither could I. I thought I was just building some shelves for the new schoolteacher. I had no idea I was building the foundation for everything that mattered. Sophia turned in his arms and looked up at him, at the face she loved more than any other. Do you have any regrets? Not a single one. You. Only that I did not find you sooner. Owen kissed her, soft and sweet and familiar. We found each other at exactly the right time, not a moment too soon or too late. They stood together in the library room, surrounded by books and memories and the quiet sounds of their children settling into sleep upstairs. Outside, the Nevada night was cool and clear, stars brilliant in the vast sky. Sophia thought about the young woman she had been, arriving in Winnemucca with her trunk full of books and her heart full of hope and fear. That woman had been searching for a place to belong, for a purpose beyond mere survival. She had found it in the most unexpected way, through the kindness of a carpenter who understood that books were not just objects but bridges between souls. The years that followed were good ones, filled with the normal joys and sorrows of life. Children grew and married and gave them grandchildren. The school continued to thrive, educating generation after generation. Owen's carpentry business became legendary in the region, known for furniture that lasted lifetimes. Thomas and his wife had 4 children and settled in Carson City, where he became principal of a large school. Margaret ultimately chose family over fame, marrying a rancher and raising 6 children while still singing at every church service and town gathering. James became a professor of literature at a university in California, writing scholarly articles about the authors his mother had first introduced him to. The younger children found their own paths, each one shaped by the values of education and love that Sophia and Owen had instilled. In 1920, on their 40th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered in Winnemucca for a celebration. The house Owen had built over the years was filled to bursting with children and grandchildren, with the sounds of multiple generations loving and laughing together. Sophia, now 65, sat in the library room surrounded by her descendants and felt a peace so profound, it was almost painful in its intensity. Owen, 69 and finally starting to slow down, sat beside her holding her hand. His hair was white now, his face deeply lined, but his eyes still held the same gentleness that had drawn her in all those years ago. "Tell us the story," one of the grandchildren begged. "Tell us about the trunk and the books and the shelves." Sophia smiled and began the tale, the story that had become family legend. How she had arrived in Winnemucca with nothing but books. How Owen had built her shelves before morning. How that single act of kindness had bloomed into a lifetime of love. The children listened with rapt attention, even though they had heard the story 100 times before. It never grew old, this tale of their grandparents meeting and falling in love against the backdrop of the Wild West. When Sophia finished, Thomas raised a glass. "To Mom and Dad, who taught us that the most valuable things in life cannot be measured in gold or cattle, but in love and knowledge and family." Everyone echoed the toast, glasses clinking, voices raised in celebration. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed or returned to their own homes, Sophia and Owen sat alone in the library room one more time. 40 years, Owen said wonderingly. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I was knocking on your door at the boarding house, nervous about offering to build shelves for a woman I barely knew. You knew me better than you realized. You saw what mattered most to me and honored it. That takes a special kind of understanding. I just saw someone who loved books the way I wanted to love something, with that kind of passion and dedication." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You taught me that kind of love, Sophia. You taught me to see the world as something full of wonder again." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who had built a life so rich and full that it sometimes seemed impossible that it had all stemmed from one moment, one trunk, one act of kindness. Owen passed away in his sleep in 1923 at the age of 72. It was peaceful, the kind of death people pray for, but it left Sophia bereft in ways she had not anticipated. They had been together for 45 years, had built a family and a legacy that would endure for generations. The house felt empty without him, the library room too quiet. But Sophia was not alone. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her with love, making sure she never felt abandoned. And she still had the books, those faithful companions that had sustained her through every trial. She lived another 7 years, teaching part-time at the school until her health no longer allowed it, reading to her great-grandchildren who gathered at her feet the way their parents once had. She told them stories about the Wild West, about Winnemucca when it was rough and new, about their grandfather who had built beautiful things with his hands and had built an even more beautiful life with his heart. Sophia Ashford died in the spring of 1930 at the age of 75, surrounded by family and books. Her last words were about Owen, about seeing him again, about being whole once more. They buried her beside him in the Winnemucca cemetery, under a headstone that Owen had carved years before, anticipating the day they would rest together. The inscription reads simply, Owen and Sophia Ashford. They built a life on books and love and left a legacy that will endure. The library in their home was preserved by the family, eventually donated to the town to serve as a public library. Sophia's original 87 books were given a place of honor, displayed behind glass with a plaque that told the story of the bride who arrived with a trunk full of books and the cowboy who built her shelves before morning. The Winnemucca Library, as it came to be known, stood for over 100 years, serving the community and educating countless children. The shelves Owen had built that first night, carefully preserved and restored when necessary, remained the centerpiece of the collection, a testament to the power of a simple act of kindness. Their descendants spread across the country, but many remained in Nevada, drawn back by the story of their grandparents and great-grandparents who had built something lasting in the wilderness. They carried forward the values of education and love, of honoring what matters and building things that endure. And in quiet corners of libraries across the West, there are shelves built by carpenters who heard the story and wanted to honor it, who understood that the best architecture comes from the heart, and that sometimes the most important thing you can build is not a house or a church or a school, but a bridge between two souls searching for connection. The story of Sophia and Owen became legend, passed down through generations as an example of how love can bloom in the most unexpected places, how kindness can transform lives, how books can build bridges between hearts. It reminded people that the best love stories are not the dramatic ones full of grand gestures and sweeping declarations, but the quiet ones built on daily acts of understanding and care. In 1978, exactly 100 years after Sophia first arrived in Winnemucca, the town held a centennial celebration honoring her legacy. Descendants from across the country gathered, bringing with them books from the original collection that had been passed down through the family. They shared stories about the matriarch and patriarch who had started it all, about the trunk full of books and the shelves built before morning, about a love that had endured through decades and beyond death. The celebration included readings from Sophia's favorite books, demonstrations of traditional carpentry in Owen's style, and the dedication of a new wing on the library that bore their names. It was a fitting tribute to two people who had understood that the most valuable inheritance you can leave is not money or property, but a love of learning and a commitment to family. The original library room from their home had been recreated in the new wing, with the shelves Owen built positioned exactly as they had been in the house. Visitors could see where Sophia had arranged her precious volumes, where the family had gathered for evening readings, where generations of children had discovered the magic of books. Standing in that recreated room, surrounded by the physical evidence of a love story that had transformed a town, visitors often reported feeling something intangible but real. A sense of peace, of rightness, of understanding that some things are meant to endure beyond individual lives. The great-great-grandchildren of Sophia and Owen continued the traditions their ancestors had started. Many became teachers or librarians, carrying forward the value of education. Others became carpenters and craftspeople, honoring Owen's dedication to building things that last. All of them carried the story, ensuring it would not be forgotten in the end. What started with a trunk full of books and a night of carpentry work became a legacy that shaped a town, a family, and countless lives. It proved that love does not need to be complicated or dramatic to be profound, that the simplest gestures can have the deepest impact, and that two broken people can come together and create something whole and beautiful and lasting. Sophia's books, those 87 volumes that had traveled from Boston to Nevada, survived through careful preservation. They remained in the library, available for viewing but no longer for borrowing, too precious to risk damage. But their spirit lived on in the thousands of other books that surrounded them, in the readers who came seeking knowledge and escape and connection, in the children who discovered that books could be bridges to other worlds. And somewhere in the great mystery beyond life, perhaps Sophia and Owen are together again, surrounded by endless shelves of books they have eternity to explore, building and reading and loving in a place where nothing ends and everything is possible. Their story reminds us all that the best love stories do not end with death, but continue in the lives they touched, the values they instilled, and the legacy they left behind. The trunk that carried those 87 books sits in the Winnemucca Library to this day, displayed alongside the shelves Owen built. On quiet mornings, when the light slants through the windows just right, you can almost see them there together. The young woman with copper hair, carefully unpacking her treasures. The carpenter with gentle eyes, measuring and planning and building something that would last far longer than he ever imagined. Two souls who found each other in the wilderness and built a love that transformed not just their lives, but the lives of everyone who came after. And that, in the end, is the truest measure of a life well lived and a love well built. Not in grand monuments or public acclaim, but in the quiet continuation of values and traditions, in the books that still get read, in the shelves that still hold them, and in the hearts that remember what it means to see someone truly and love them completely. The bride's trunk held nothing but books, and the cowboy built her a shelf before morning, and from that simple beginning came a story worth telling for generations to come.